They told us the Hunger Games was fiction, a futuristic nightmare built for entertainment, a story of tyranny, rebellion, and spectacle. But what if I told you it wasn't fiction at all? What if the Hunger Games was a memory, a trace of something our world once lived through, then buried, erased, and disguised as a movie? History has a strange habit of repeating itself, and sometimes it hides its crimes in plain sight. Think about it. A society divided by wealth, controlled by fear. A capital that feeds on distraction and luxury while distant districts fight to survive. It's easy to dismiss as dystopia until you realize that's exactly how power works today. The truth is, the line between fiction and memory is thinner than we want to believe. And every time we consume a story like the Hunger Games, we're not watching fantasy, we're watching conditioning, predictive programming, a psychological operation dressed as entertainment. The purpose? To prepare us, to make us comfortable with control, to make rebellion look like a story that only exists on a screen. Because once people believe the arena is fiction, they stop realizing they're already standing inside it. You see, every empire from Rome to Silicon Valley has known one unshakable truth. People who are entertained don't rebel. The Romans called it panem circenses, bread and circuses. Give the people games and they will forget their chains. Now listen closely. Panem, the name of the nation in the Hunger Games, literally comes from that phrase. Bread and circuses. Coincidence or confession? What if Suzanne Collins didn't imagine this world? What if she remembered it? What if her so-called fiction was a recovered echo of a timeline that no longer officially exists? One that powerful people have tried to erase from our collective mind. Think about the details they don't explain. How did the world of Panem begin? Why did civilization collapse? Who decided the games were necessary? The story begins after the catastrophe, as if someone cut out the part we were never meant to know. And here's where it gets darker. Because every major culture in human history has run some version of the games. Public sacrifice, ritualized competition, death as performance. From Aztec arenas to Roman colosseums, from medieval trials by combat to modern reality television, we've always turned survival into spectacle. So maybe this isn't entertainment at all. Maybe it's memory, rebranded as art. Maybe the Hunger Games was never meant to warn us, but to remind us of the world we already built once before. Pause. Voice drops to a whisper, and the elites erased it. They scrubbed the timeline. They left us with a story because stories are safer than truth. Every civilization tells stories to hide what it's done. We call them myths, legends, or sometimes movies. But buried inside every work of fiction is a trace of something that actually happened. And when you start to connect those traces, you see a disturbing pattern, a pattern that points to one conclusion. The Hunger Games might not be predicting the future. It might be leaking the past. Imagine this. Thousands of years ago, or maybe not so long ago at all, humanity lived through a collapse, a total reset of civilization, resources gone, systems broken, governments desperate, the survivors rebuilt. But someone decided they needed control. They couldn't risk freedom, so they engineered obedience. And how do you control a desperate population? You give them hope, wrapped in fear. You divide them into zones, make them fight for privilege, and broadcast their pain as entertainment. That was the world of Panem, not a fantasy, a memory carefully erased, then reintroduced through fiction. If this sounds impossible, remember, history is written by whoever wins and rewritten by whoever wants to stay in power. In ancient Rome, emperors ruled a population on the edge of revolt. So they gave them the Colosseum, a place where human lives were traded for distraction. Slaves, criminals, and prisoners were turned into tributes. Their deaths were events. Crowds screamed, cheered, cried, and in that noise, Rome stayed silent about its corruption. Sound familiar? That wasn't entertainment. It was programming, a way to teach people that violence was normal, that their suffering was justified, that power was divine. When you look at the Hunger Games through that lens, it's not a dystopia. It's a pattern repeating itself. And Rome wasn't the only one. Fast forward centuries. The Soviet Union perfected the art of erasing truth. People who questioned authority were literally deleted from history. Old photos were airbrushed, names were rewritten, entire individuals vanished, as if they never existed. It wasn't just censorship, it was timeline control, reality editing, and the world accepted it because the alternative was chaos. Then came the 20th century, the Cold War, propaganda, and something much darker, MK Ultra, a secret CIA program that used hypnosis, LSD, and trauma to study human obedience. Its purpose wasn't just control, it was erasure, to break minds, rebuild them, and rewrite memories. Officially, the program was terminated, but fragments of its research still surface in entertainment, art, and media. The same way the Hunger Games surfaces as a story, a controlled leak disguised as fiction. Because maybe that's the safest way to remember the truth without threatening the people who buried it. Now, imagine if after every historical reset, Rome, the Soviet era, the Cold War, there was another layer, another reset deeper than we know. A world wiped clean. But someone remembered. Someone hid the memory inside a screenplay, inside a book, inside a franchise too popular to censor. That's the theory of the forgotten timeline, that the Hunger Games isn't prophecy, it's confession. And once you see it through that lens, you start noticing that everything, from our politics to our entertainment, is built to remind us of a world we're not supposed to recall. A world where control was survival, where spectacle replaced truth, and where history itself became the first casualty. Because maybe, just maybe, Panem wasn't created for us, it was created from us. If you want to control the future, you don't destroy ideas, you plant them. You make people believe the cage was their choice. That's the purpose of predictive programming, a theory the media loves to mock, but one that history quietly confirms. It works like this. First, you reveal a disturbing concept, a dystopia, a disaster, a new kind of control. You present it as fiction. Then you repeat it again and again, in movies, in books, in games, in ads, until the idea stops being shocking, until it feels inevitable, until it feels normal. That's how you program a population without them ever realizing. Think back to the Hunger Games. When the films came out, millions cheered. Children dressed as tributes. Fans debated which district they'd belong to. It became culture. But that's exactly how desensitization works. You celebrate what you should fear. You consume what should disturb you. They made the idea of televised death fun. They turned oppression into aesthetic. And while you were busy rooting for Katniss, you forgot what the real message was. That control doesn't always look like tyranny. Sometimes it looks like entertainment. We've seen this before. In the 1950s, during the height of the Cold War, the CIA launched Operation Mockingbird, a classified program to influence movies, TV, and news. Their goal was simple: to steer public opinion without ever needing to censor directly. They placed operatives in media companies, funded creative consultants, and made sure the right stories reached the screen. Stories that kept citizens afraid, obedient, predictable. And when people questioned it, the truth was buried under another layer of fiction. Fast forward. Decades later, governments no longer need spies in newsrooms. The system runs itself. Corporations are the new empires, and Hollywood is their most effective weapon. Why send soldiers when a blockbuster can do the same job? Just think about it. How many dystopian films have taught us to accept surveillance, social scoring, or population control as possible futures? Black Mirror, 1984, The Purge, Snowpiercer, Squid Game. Each one pushes the same narrative. Resistance is noble, but futile. It's entertainment as emotional anesthesia. Now, here's where it gets darker. Psychologists once believed that fiction helps people process fear, but intelligence agencies saw something else. Fiction trains people to submit to it. When you show a population a controlled horror and make it glamorous, cathartic, and safe, you condition them to accept the real thing later. The Roman emperors knew this. The Soviets perfected it, and the modern entertainment machine industrialized it. Today, we don't watch the Hunger Games. We live it. We broadcast our own lives as survival stories. We compete for attention, likes, and approval, the new currency of the digital capital, and the cameras are always on. What if I told you that predictive programming isn't just about showing you what's coming? It's about testing how you'll react. Every dystopia is a behavioral experiment, a simulation. The moment we accept it as fiction, the data is collected. Our emotions, our tolerance, our silence. And when the real version arrives, no one resists, because we've already seen the trailer. So maybe the Hunger Games isn't a warning at all. Maybe it's a system check, a psychological calibration. They didn't predict our future. They measured our readiness, and we passed the test. Control doesn't need chains anymore. It just needs architecture. Every empire eventually learns that fear alone isn't sustainable. It burns too fast. It breaks too many. So power evolves. It learns subtlety. It learns spectacle. And that's where the Hunger Games becomes more than a story. It becomes a blueprint. Panem isn't some faraway dystopia. It's a mirror held up to our world. The same structure, different costume. Look closely. 13 districts, each with a single purpose. Labor, technology, agriculture, luxury. Each one isolated, fragmented, replaceable. And above them, a capital of indulgence and surveillance. Now, strip away the costumes and neon. What do you see? Global capitalism, economic zones, first world and third world, consumers and producers, luxury and labor, one global arena designed to sustain the few through the exhaustion of the many. That isn't fiction, that's geopolitics. The only difference is that our games aren't televised. They're digital. Today, the capital isn't a place, it's a network. A constellation of corporations, governments, and data centers that feed on our attention instead of our blood. Every click is a bet. Every post is a tribute. Every outrage is a performance in the new arena, the algorithm, and the algorithm never sleeps. It decides who's seen, who's forgotten, who gets fed, who gets censored, who climbs, who burns. The games have evolved. Now, the weapon isn't a bow or an arena, it's information. You no longer fight for food, you fight for visibility. In Panem, the capital used spectacle to distract the masses. Today we call it social media, the same mechanics, the same psychology. Keep the districts divided by ideology, by class, by fear. And they'll never realize they share the same enemy. Divide, distract, entertain. That's the design of control. And just like the games, the audience plays a role. They cheer, they boo, they invest emotionally. Because when you're watching, you're not thinking. When you're reacting, you're not rebelling. You are the citizen of Panem. You just haven't noticed. Now, let's talk tribute. In the Hunger Games, each district sacrifices its youth. A child offered up in exchange for peace, symbolic, horrifying. But in our world, it's less visible, more efficient. We sacrifice our youth to the system differently, through debt, depression, overwork, and digital addiction. They give their lives to a machine that feeds on time and attention, a quiet tribute paid daily. And the capital, the financial, political, and media elite, feeds on that sacrifice. It's a loop of power sustained by exhaustion. But here's what makes it brilliant. No one forces us. We volunteer, we post, we compete, we perform, we build the arenas ourselves. Because the greatest innovation in control wasn't surveillance, it was participation. The moment we turned our lives into content, we became our own cameras, our own enforcers, our own games makers. So when you look at Panem now, don't look for dictatorship. Look for design. Look for a system that promises comfort but demands obedience. Look for a structure that rewards visibility over truth, that punishes dissent not with death but with silence. Because silence is the new execution. Oblivion is the new arena. And the question isn't, could the Hunger Games ever happen? The question is, how long have we been living in them already? There's a reason humanity is obsessed with apocalypse. Every culture, every religion, every myth speaks of a reset, a flood, a fire, a fall, then silence. What if those aren't prophecies, but recollections? Faint memories of a cycle that keeps repeating, because civilizations don't just collapse, they're erased. And after each erasure, someone rewrites the story. Think about it. Why does every continent have legends of an age of excess followed by divine punishment? Atlantis, Sodom, the Tower of Babel, different names, same pattern, hubris, catastrophe, control. Now, imagine if the Hunger Games is one of those retellings, a leaked myth from a previous world, a civilization advanced enough to broadcast death, primitive enough to call it justice. When that world ended, its survivors buried the memory. But memory has gravity. It pulls through time, through dream, through art. And sometimes it resurfaces disguised as fiction. Archaeology gives us fragments of forgotten empires, but collective memory leaves symbols. Ritual sacrifice, pageantry of power, public punishment, always the same design. In ancient Mesoamerica, children were offered to the gods to guarantee reign. In medieval Europe, executions became festivals. In the 20th century, world wars were televised in parades of nationalism. Each era found beauty in destruction. Each called it necessary. Isn't that the essence of the games? A ritual that disguises trauma as tradition. Psychologists call this cultural amnesia. When an event is too large, too horrifying, societies repress it. They reshape it into story. That's how trauma survives without evidence. And trauma, like radiation, leaks. It seeps into art, myth, and entertainment until someone notices the pattern. Then the erasure begins again. Books burned, films banned, timelines corrected. Every few centuries, we start over, believing we're the first civilization to flirt with collapse. But maybe we're just the next. Look at the clues left behind. Structures older than our calendars, monuments built with impossible precision, stories of gods who arrived after the last flood. Were they gods or survivors from the timeline before ours? If those survivors rebuilt the world, they'd need obedience, they'd need control, they'd need a way to prevent rebellion. So they created the new mythology, a culture of distraction and hierarchy, a game of survival dressed as civilization. And here's the chilling part. Every time the system resets, a few fragments escape. Symbols, memories, archetypes. They become our stories, our warnings, our entertainment. The Hunger Games might be one of those fragments, a buried recollection rewritten as screenplay, a trauma the human mind keeps trying to process. But power keeps forcing us to forget. Because if we ever remembered fully, we'd recognize the pattern. And once you recognize a pattern, you can break it. Maybe that's why they keep us entertained, because entertainment is the safest form of remembrance, a truth too dangerous to believe. So they let us call it fiction. Every generation thinks it's free. That's how control works now. Not through force, but through permission. They don't cage us. They convince us the cage is comfort. Look around. The capital of our age isn't built of marble. It's made of glass and signal, skyscrapers shaped like data towers, networks pulsing like arteries. Every transaction, every movement, every emotion recorded, sorted, monetized. Surveillance once meant cameras on poles. Now it means the lens in your hand. We call it convenience. But convenience is the currency of obedience. In the Hunger Games, the Capitol watched every heartbeat of the tributes. Today, the same technology watches ours. Not to entertain, at least not officially, but to predict, persuade, and guide. Scroll, click, swipe. The gestures look harmless, but each is a data offering, a modern form of tribute. You don't send grain or gold anymore. You send yourself, your habits, your fears, your preferences, fed into algorithms that decide what you see, who you meet, what you believe. And the more it knows you, the more it owns you. In Panem, rebellion was televised. In our world, outrage is live-streamed. Every protest, every scandal, every tragedy converted into digital spectacle within minutes. We think exposure equals justice, but exposure is also containment. When anger becomes content, it stops being threat. The system learns our limits. It calibrates how much pain we'll scroll past before we stop caring. That's the new game, a continuous experiment in emotional endurance. Even the structure of our economy mirrors the districts. A handful of cities, financial or technological capitals, hold the wealth of nations. Meanwhile, production zones, sweatshops, gig workforces sustain their luxury from afar, a seamless design of distance. The ones who suffer never see the ones who dine, just like the districts never saw the capital, except through a screen. Then there's entertainment itself, the new religion of distraction, award shows that worship excess, reality programs built on humiliation, streams of curated perfection selling the illusion of choice. Every image whispers the same sermon: be visible, be desirable, be quiet. Because the louder the spectacle, the easier it is to hide what's real. And yet, despite the comfort, despite the algorithms and the lights, there's a pulse of déjà vu running through humanity. A strange awareness that something ancient is repeating. Why do we romanticize rebellion while fearing change? Why do we celebrate dystopia as genre instead of warning? Maybe because some part of us remembers the last time. Maybe the mind of the species is starting to wake. If the Hunger Games was memory disguised as fiction, then what we're living now might be rehearsal disguised as freedom. Every screen, a new arena. Every feed, a new fight. Every viewer, a silent sponsor betting on who survives. We don't need to volunteer as tribute anymore. We already did. the moment we chose comfort over awareness. Every system leaves a flaw, a spark that refuses to die. In the Hunger Games, that spark is Katniss Everdeen. To the Capitol, she's a pawn, a symbol they can weaponize. To the districts, she's a myth reborn. To the viewer, she's a question the system cannot answer. What happens when obedience remembers freedom? The Capitol burns people, not bodies. It burns the idea that a single act of defiance can spread. So it controls the narrative. It televises rebellion the same way it televises death, turning resistance into programming, revolution into ratings. But the mockingjay doesn't belong to them. The bird sings because it cannot do anything else. That's the secret of the symbol. Fire, in Collins's world, is more than destruction. It's memory reigniting. The spark that leaps across resets. Every time civilization erases itself, fire survives. Knowledge, instinct, refusal. History hides the same motif. Prometheus, stealing flame from the gods. The phoenix rising from ashes. Rebels smuggling forbidden books through inquisitions. It's always the same story retold in new language. The unkillable thought that power fears most. Katniss is just the latest vessel, a message smuggled through popular culture, the costume of a blockbuster concealing an ancient code. Look closer at the mockingjay pen, a creature born from imitation, singing songs it was never taught. That's humanity after every reset, imitating echoes of a world we've forgotten. We repeat myths because they're the only files that survived the purge. Maybe the Hunger Games spread because something inside us recognized it, not as entertainment, but as proof of continuity. A reminder that rebellion is hardwired, that consciousness remembers even when history doesn't. That's why the story had to reach everyone. Translated, merchandised, streamed, because the same machine that suppresses truth accidentally became the messenger of it. The Capitol can control the broadcast, but it can't control interpretation. Once an idea touches imagination, it mutates. It slips past filters, past censors, past fear. That's the true weapon, imagination as contagion. So the hidden message is simple and devastating. Every age of control creates its own rebellion. Every algorithm leaves a crack. Every spectacle plants the seed of its undoing. When you hear the mockingjay sing, you're not just hearing fiction, you're hearing the sound of the timeline waking up again. Fire does not forget where it came from. Every age believes it is the end of history, that nothing came before quite like it, and nothing after will match its light. But the truth hums under every civilization like a fault line. The world doesn't end. It resets. It forgets. What if our myths, our movies, our endless stories of collapse are not warnings, but recollections surfacing from the deep code of memory? We build towers. We invent gods. We stage wars on screens. And each time we tell ourselves it's for progress. But maybe we are only repeating the same experiment, a civilization rehearsing its own fall. The Capitol was never a city. It was an idea. It's what happens when comfort becomes religion, when distraction replaces purpose, when empathy is scheduled for commercial breaks. Panem's citizens didn't lose freedom all at once. They voted for it, in exchange for safety, for luxury, for endless shows. And that trade has echoed through centuries. Bread for silence, circuses for peace. We've simply digitized the arena. The modern tributes don't bleed on sand. They burn out on screens. Their sacrifice is measured in clicks, in hours worked, in the quiet exhaustion that fuels someone else's abundance. And all of us, spectators and players alike, applaud as if applause could keep the system stable. You can't destroy a system built on consent. You can only withdraw belief. The moment a story stops being convincing, its power cracks. That's why stories matter more than armies. They are the blueprints of reality. Whoever controls the narrative controls the timeline. And yet, in every age, a counter story emerges. A whisper, a song sung by a bird that shouldn't exist. Katniss was never the hero. She was the frequency of refusal, the reminder that even in a world engineered for obedience, something unpredictable survives, something that burns. Maybe that's why the Hunger Games still lingers, because deep down we recognize the scenery, the districts, the capital, the audience. All of it feels like deja vu. We sense the repetition, the elegant design of captivity. And somewhere in that recognition, a spark catches. It doesn't scream revolution. It whispers remembrance. It says, "You've been here before. Don't play their game again." That's the real subtext hidden beneath the spectacle. That humanity keeps surviving its own amnesia. That memory, once lit, refuses to stay buried. So when the credits roll, when the lights return and the world looks normal again, remember this. Stories are not safe. They're weapons that remember for us. Every time you watch one, something inside you wakes a little. Maybe that's all the rebellion we need. Not fire raining from the sky, but a single spark of awareness passed quietly from one mind to another. Because once enough people remember, the games end, and history finally has to start telling the truth. Until then, keep watching the screens. They're still leaking memories,